to put out content, I guess I'm going to do a video on a book I got in high school. I read again like a year ago. I just folded some pages on some points I want to talk about, some things I want to bring up, and I guess I'm going to bring up this book to you. This book is called Against Method by Paul Feyerabend. It is that title is a bit misleading, but it's also totally accurate. So he's describing what lots of people label epistemological anarchism. This term comes from himself, but he does challenge it a bit as well. This is brought up in the introduction to the first edition by Ein Hacking, where he says that maybe Dadaist is the better label for me. Maybe I'm an epistemological Dadaist. His reasons for, counter signaling to Lakrikos, the label anarchist, gets a bit silly because he says that anarchism cares little for human lives and human happiness, except for the lives and happiness of those who belong to a special group, in parentheses. That's a bit of a weird reason to me. But the Dadaist label is good, because the whole book itself, you're against sort of the validity of language structures, of logic, and of science, but you're using sort of rationality, language structures. Whether you're using them well or not, you're using them to attack logic, to attack reason, to attack science. But he's a friend to science. Don't think that he isn't. In fact, he's arguing he's more of a friend to science than the positivist. Then he's more of a friend to science than Bertrand Russell or anyone else who holds on to these. Because his entire argument, the reason why most of his points revolve specifically around the history of science, because he's got like 20 points that he makes in this book. I went and I noted which ones are historical, or at least seemed to be purely historical to me. 10 of his points, so that's 10 of 20, that's half. So that's half of his points specifically revolving around history. And specifically, the history that he focuses on the most is Galileo. He points out that Galileo couldn't explain certain things. He couldn't explain, like, why when I drop this book, it just falls down, not a little bit to the left, or a little bit to the right of me, or a little bit in front of where I drop it. That's something fairly easy to explain. But we can explain it now. Galileo couldn't, and that's the point. There is an example within the footnotes that I quite liked. Footnote 23 on page 81, where he quotes the Duchy of Umbro, and he talks about these scientists coming to Galileo, and they're getting different results than Galileo from the telescope. And, he goes quite a bit into optics and the science of optics at the time of Galileo. So the point he's driving home is to sum up, as he does on page 129, a modern scientist really has no choice in the matter. He cannot cling on to his own strict standards and at the same time praise Galileo for defending Copernicus. He must agree with the first part on the judgment of the church experts. I keep trying to say fathers there, because I actually recorded this sometimes. Or admit that the standard facts and laws never decide the case. To quote him. So, That's the point he's trying to drive home, is that Galileo was wrong, but he was right. But he's wrong if we accept, this system. And if we are going to say that science must always follow these systems, then we got to keep censoring people like Galileo. And it's going to be harmful to science. And he makes other points. He points out one of the things that motivated him was, as he's starting to teach, we got these black people coming in, and we got these Mexicans coming in to university for the first time, and these women. And so we're taking some of these people and we're telling them, maybe not black people because they're westernized, but unwesternized people that are coming into Western universities. We're saying what is wrong. We figured out the right way. And so you must forget all your culture, all your science that you developed without white man, and throw it away because the white man has figured it all out. So he points out as well, from his experience, there seems to be a kind of racism embedded in there, which I thought was an interesting point. But either way, one of the things that's the main reasons why he views that we must go against, these rationales, these logics, why we must go against the scientific method to properly do science. One of the things he cites is he borrows the term from Marx and Lenin, uneven development, where the development towards an end may be uneven, and so this makes Feyerabend, I guess, less coherent. But being less coherent when part of the point is that sometimes you need to be incoherent. I don't know if that's really even an argument against him that he would accept. But either way, he cites uneven development as a reason why we must do this sometimes. In fact, it's one of the main reasons that we might do this sometimes. Another example of uneven development would be Max Planck. And I think he's a much more noble figure to look at to get to the point that Feyerabend's trying to look at. Because Max Planck viewed what he said as irrational, illogical, his solution to the black body problem. He came up with it because it just makes the math works. And maybe it's only coherent so far as that. It's just too counterintuitive to really be good, is Max Planck's point. But it's the only solution that he could come up with. Talking about this quantization of energy and so on. But that makes Max Planck already a more noble figure than Galileo, because what Galileo did was kind of dishonest. And another thing about the Inquisition at this time, at least the Italian Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition bad, Spanish Inquisition also anti-Semitic, which led to a bunch of Jews moving over to Italy, which is why you have a bunch of Italian Renaissance people interested in the Kabbalah. Like Pico della Milandra especially, but I mean, lots of people were interested in the Kabbalah there. So, the Inquisition really only went after people who were asses. This is not a point that Feyerabend makes. And this is consistent with the Italian work ethic, they don't like to do stuff. Very respectable. This is the reason Rome wasn't built in a day. Was the Italian work ethic. But Max Planck is much more respectable because he's proposing this at the same time knowing why we can't accept it. Galileo is proposing this and calling people stinky for not accepting it. Even though Heliocentrism was rejected on good grounds. Lots of people, especially atheists, they like to posit the heliocentrists of the Renaissance as big monitors for science. This is really absurd when we get to the figure of Giordano Bruno. Now, Giordano Bruno, who is actually not brought up here, but atheists bring him up in line with Galileo, because they act like he's some martyr for science when what he was accused of was denying the Trinity, denying the virgin birth, calling Catholics asses, and, of course, the divinity of Jesus. That's why he was put on trial for heresy. Which I would actually argue that he can't deny the Trinity, or at least a Trinity. Which maybe I should learn more about Bruno before I say this. I'll shut up because I don't know Bruno's exact views. So, yeah, so Bruno's argument for heliocentrism, however, which had nothing to do with his, Inquisition, was that, well, the Egyptians believed this and the Orphics believed this, therefore it must be true. That was Bruno's point. And so the church experts were like, hey, this is unscientific. The reasoning for this is one that we can't accept. And he ended up making heliocentrist look bad. Because now when people think heliocentrist, they're thinking, oh, that Bruno guy, I remember him. So, yeah. There's other points that Feyerabend makes about logic, of course, is like, well, there are multiple forms of logic. How do we accept this language structure over that language structure? And, he posits that arithmetic developed in a sort of state of uneven development. Arithmetic developed before we had a coherent idea of numbers. Or, to quote him directly, arithmetic developed without any clear understanding of the concept of number. Such understanding arose only when there existed sufficient amount of arithmetical facts to give it substance. So, yeah. So he's making lot points like that. Of course, Max Planck is a better figure to try and drive home the point. But the reason why we would use Galileo is Galileo's one of the big martyrs of science. And when I said that the Inquisition went after asses, I'm not defending the Inquisition there, by the way. Because I don't agree with the Inquisition, but I'm just saying, the people I know that the Inquisition went after, Giovanni Bruno, Galileo, Pico della Milandra, were all behaving like asses. So, yeah. And this using of uneven development, that term, I think, of course, as I said, makes it more incoherent. Because Marx, from my understanding of Marx, is positing that history is it's necessary that it's going to unfold in these way. That feudalism would have necessarily given rise to capitalism, and this growing gentry class would give rise to capitalism, and capitalism would industrialize, and the contradictions would become too apparent, and the working class will be fed up. It would take too much abuse. So it's going to revolt because the people don't like being oppressed. So, yeah. It's quite nice, the book. I recommend it. It's a good read. I enjoyed it. Yeah. I can't think of much more to say. Yeah, I have been your favorite homosexual, and I am out.